Welcome back to Law and Society, where legal and social issues come together. Andrew Stevenson, our attorney at law, criminal defense attorney for over 20 years.
Over 20 years.
And has seen, I don't want to say has seen it all, but you've seen a lot.
I've seen a lot, yes.
And your mission is to educate people. You have the top 10 things that can get you thrown in jail.
Yep.
And what we're talking about today.
I think this came in at number 7 or 8.
All right. We're not going in any particular order.
We're not going in any particular order.
But it's a fascinating subject. If you missed any part of it or you want someone else to hear it, you can go to StevensonCriminalDefense.com. You'll link our podcast. As soon as I post them, they get linked. So this is our fourth show? Fourth show. So. And so we're going to do a year-long series here of the things that you want to avoid, the pitfalls. Right. We're talking about the Fourth Amendment today in honor of July 4th, and we have a new Supreme Court Justice nominee. We'll see what happens with that. Seems to be very conservative. So
yes, I think so.
Whenever, as soon as the Chuck Schumer flag was raised, we're going to do everything we can to defeat this one, you're like, okay, must be conservative.
Yes.
Anyway, on this segment, I want to talk about consent. We've talked about can they and what a warrant is, but how many times do people simply just give consent without even thinking about, what their consequences are?
Far more often than the police ever get a warrant.
Really?
Yeah.
So most searches are just consensual.
A fair majority. It's either consensual or the officer believes they have probable cause. Very few warrants, with the exception of one particular area, are really obtained. Now, homes, generally a warrant is received, but to search a person or a vehicle, generally consent is given. I've had cases where people consented to the search of a house. Mm-hmm. It's strange because clients will come into my office, or I'll talk to them on the phone, and I'll ask them the question. I said, if the mailman came to your door and knocked on your door and said, hey, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to come in, rummage through your underwear drawer, take a look at your financial records, and maybe delve into your medical files.
Oh, by the way, I need your email password,
and your email password, too. Would you let them in? And I've never had a person say, well, of course I would. But I have had cases where the police simply do what's called a knock and talk.
Uh-huh.
And that's what it is. They knock on the door and they start talking to somebody. Do you know so-and-so? Did you see this? And usually a knock and talk, they suspect the person who they're talking to is involved in something. Mm-hmm. It's not random. And eventually that person invites them into the living room. And then once they're in the living room, the police say, well, you mind if we take a look around? We're already in here. And they say, sure. 45 minutes later, after they're dumping the trash cans and everything else, they find what they're looking for, and off to jail they go.
Well, let's start with that, because when you say, I think most people think have a look around means, I'm just going to take a mosey around.
That's what they say, yeah.
But when you give consent, at that point, it's wide open, right?
Correct. You can withdraw it if it is consent of a home.
If they start to dump out silverware drawers, you can say, whoa, stop, I'm done.
I'm done, correct. A car, however, usually what they do is they put you in the back of the cruiser,
right?
And then they just start going through it, and there's not much you can do because they close the door, and you can't. And so the home, yes, but generally once they get started, once you give consent, it even gets more complicated when you give consent. There's a bunch of cases who can give consent to the search of a house. Do you have to live there? Do you just have to be spending the night? Do you have to be an adult? Can you be a family member?
That's a good question. If you're not the legal owner of the house, the deed holder, can you give consent to search?
Generally, no, unless you are, for example, a relative staying for a period of time. The general rule of thumb is you have to have an expectation of privacy in the area to be able to give consent to search it. Mm-hmm. So I can't consent to the search of your house, and you can't consent to the search of my house because I don't have an expectation of privacy. Again,
why are people giving consent like this?
Over the years, the number one thing I have heard is two things. Number one, I didn't know I could say no. They flat out just say, I didn't know what my rights were.
He's got a badge and a gun.
He's got a badge and a gun. And that's number two, was I thought I had to because he had a badge and a gun. I've also heard, I thought, this is usually with cars, that if I played along and was nice, that the officer wouldn't charge me when he found my marijuana.
Okay.
That's the other, but
hey, I was cooperative, right?
But the officers don't have a choice. Once they find evidence of a crime, they're legally bound to collect it. Mm-hmm. They can't just give you your weed back and send you down the road. But that's what people believe.
Wow.
And they also think that they don't want to look like they're hiding something, and that maybe the officer won't find it. So if you got marijuana plants in your basement and they come knock on the door and want to do a knock and talk, you let them in. They say, "We mind if we take a look around?" You think, well, they'll never go in the basement. They're just going to look in the living room. The first place they go is the basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this is, you're thinking, oh, they're just going to do a quick, turn their head. And no, I mean, you're consenting to having your entire house or car or whatever searched.
People ask me, well, what should I say? What should I do?
What are our rights? I mean,
basically, you have a right to say no. You don't have to be unpleasant. You don't have to be obnoxious, but you do have a right to say no. Now, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. It's socially awkward because when somebody asks you something, there's a natural tendency to want to agree with them and go along, and that's part of it. But you can simply say no, thank you.
You can practice on your in-laws.
You can practice on your in-laws.
Can I rummage through your bedroom? No. You can get used to it.
You can, and it's all you're doing is saying follow the Fourth Amendment, officer.
Now,
because that's what the Fourth Amendment wants them to do, is to get a warrant.
Now, we talked about last segment. If you get pulled over, and on the chance they want to search your car, they could opt to go ahead anyway.
They can go ahead with the probable cause.
Is the home? You also said that the home is one of the most where you get maximum expectation of privacy.
Yes.
So that part doesn't.
No, they can still search your home with probable cause.
Really, they can still come in,
but it had better be really, really good. Okay. Or when you get to court, the search is going to be found to be illegal.
A really good attorney like you is going to have that.
It better be.
Yeah.
Normally, what the law prefers they do, because it's a home, is secure the premises.
Yeah, stand there,
get everyone out of the house. Mm-hmm. And I've had cases where they did that. People said, no, you can't come in. And then they ordered them out of the house. They got a warrant, they came back, and then they searched the house.
Right.
That's usually what they do with a home. I've had cases where the cops just said, I have probable cause, and came on in the front door. And in those instances, those searches were deemed to be unreasonable and illegal.
Again, it comes down to reasonable search and seizure and
what
the warrant.
What the consequence is, interestingly, is if that happens, if the police conduct an illegal or unreasonable search, they don't get fined, they don't go to jail. All that happens is the evidence that they find is excluded from trial. Mm-hmm. That's the penalty that the law enforcement has to pay.
Yeah, right, exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean the case gets tossed if there's other evidence that they can bring in. It's the tainted evidence from the illegal search. I've been watching my Law and Order.
Have you been watching Law and Order?
Well, okay. and it's interesting because I've heard several times on that show the judge will say this isn't a fishing expedition.
Right.
Meaning there's specific things in that warrant. So again, if you're securing the property and saying I'm going to go get the warrant, it has to be, you have to pretty much know what you're looking for, right?
Correct.
Again, within that broad brush of, throw everything but the kitchen sink in there.
Right.
And the kitchen sink, if it's got weed stems in it or something, I don't know. Again, but just this simple thing of saying, I prefer that you go get a warrant.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say.
And sometimes, again, if it's something fairly minor, they may or may not go get the warrant.
Probably aren't going to go get a warrant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk about cell phones.
This became a big issue.
Yeah. I mean, again, they're not necessarily me, because if I lose my phone, I don't want my entire life stolen. But there are people that do have just
everything,
their
entire life.
But if you think about it, you get an email.
Yeah.
You receive an email on your phone, and it's got any kind of confidential information in it.
I don't conduct business off my cell phone for that particular reason.
I order pizzas, so maybe my preferred pizza points at Christie's might be into play.
But there was a. Finally, the states were trying to wrestle what to do with cell phones. How much privacy can they search them? And there was a case called Riley versus California, which essentially was a traffic stop. And in the traffic stop, the police found the person's cell phone, and they started looking through it, and in doing so, found evidence of another crime. Mr. Riley objected to the search. It went to trial. The trial judge didn't exclude it, allowed the evidence. He was convicted, and it went to the United States Supreme Court. This was in 2014. And the question before the United States Supreme Court was very simple. Do the police need a warrant to search a cell phone if consent is not given? And they came back with a resounding, unanimous yes.
So with that, you have to have a warrant to search the phone. Same probable cause. There's probable cause of evidence on that phone. Can you secure the phone like you do a house? Can you say, I'm going to hold this phone and until I get the warrant?
Yes.
So they're allowed to seize it.
Well, they're allowed to seize it. They also, depending upon the nature of the officer and the sophistication, sometimes they put them in a Faraday bag.
Yeah. Yeah.
Faraday bag it prevents electronic transmission.
Electronic shielding. Right.
And then they have a lot of law enforcement agencies and prosecutors' office have what's called extraction software.
Right.
But the Supreme Court really came out in that opinion and said that the search of a cell phone would reveal more information about a person than the most exhaustive search of a home. And so they gave it a good deal of protection. And so what we find is that law enforcement gets a lot of cell phone search warrants. A lot.
Because they said it all right there that your entire life is on that phone.
Right. And in part because of the enormous amount of information that's on there. But the issue becomes they still have to get around the passcode.
And they can't require you to give that passcode, can they?
Usually, officers simply ask. And you would be surprised, once again, a number of people who give them the passcode. I would say in 60% of my cases, maybe 70, the individual gave the passcode to the officer when they took his phone.
And now we've got these thumbprint, fingerprint IDs and all that.
Well, yeah, that was also litigated. And the question came, can law enforcement or a prosecutor require a person to give the passcode? Can they make you tell them what it is? And the answer is no. Because that violates the Fifth Amendment, which is
self-incrimination.
However, the question then was asked, well, can we take their fingerprint? Can we make them put their fingerprint on the phone? And the answer to that question is yes.
Really?
Yes. And now and I think Apple intentionally has created this facial recognition software as a way around having to deal with this stuff about can they crack the phone, because all the officer has to do then is hold it up to the face and they're in. I don't think Apple will tell you that, but that's my theory.
There are, and the cell phone companies have been, I know when the Justice Department, when the Homeland Security wanted, make the magic code that unlocks any phone, the phone companies were resistant to that, to try to protect.
Apple has been the big leader in this, and it's in part because they pride themselves on their own security. They want their customers to have sense of security that people are not going to be able to hack their phone.
This has been, and they've done generally a good job. When you think about, you don't hear a lot about viruses and hacking into Apple devices. They tend to be pretty good.
Yeah.
But
when law enforcement wanted into the phone, they had a decision to make, and they basically said, nope, we're going to. And so the first thing they did was give the control to the user. And now they've created the facial recognition, which is going to solve everybody's problems.
So the bottom line, the Supreme Court basically has said your phone is very private. It's one of the highest things of privacy.
It's probably higher than the house now.
Wow, that's amazing, because they're so ubiquitous. They're just it's just everywhere. You have your device, and if you watch people walking around, they literally never look up.
Yeah.
This has been a great show, and we are going to do a separate show on talking to the police, and I'm looking forward to that one too, because you talk about slippery slopes.
It is.
We've kind of said if you're don't talk to the police. General rule: have a lawyer, right?
Have a lawyer. Yeah.
All right. This has been such a great segment. I just totally ignored time on this one. Right. So thank you, Andrew. Again, StevensonCriminalDefense.com.
Yes.
And we'll look forward to next month's topic, okay?
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
You've been listening to Law and Society, where legal and social issues come together. Again, if you'd like to hear this show again or have a copy of it, you can go to our website, wolfohio.com, or StevensCriminalDefense.com. We'll be back next.